The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, people rushing to their gates, announcements echoing overhead. Among the travelers, Sergeant Daniel Hayes walked with a sense of duty, his uniform crisp, his posture upright. Beside him, Colonel James Parker, a disabled veteran, moved slowly in his wheelchair, his face marked with years of service and sacrifice. Daniel had been assigned to escort Colonel Parker to his destination, an honor he took seriously. But as they approached the boarding gate, the airline staff blocked their path. "Sir, only authorized personnel can assist passengers with disabilities," said a flight attendant with a forced smile. Daniel frowned. "I am authorized. This is Colonel Parker, a decorated war hero. I'm escorting him as per his request." The attendant shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we have our own protocols. You need to let our staff handle this." The colonel, sensing tension, tried to defuse the situation. "Son, I appreciate your concern, but maybe we should just—" "No, sir," Daniel interjected firmly. "You deserve dignity and respect." The flight attendant folded her arms. "Rules are rules." Passengers nearby started to notice. A murmur spread through the crowd. A young woman whispered, "Are they seriously stopping a soldier from helping a veteran?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He wasn't about to let this slide. As tension mounted, one voice rang out from the crowd, "This isn't right. We won't stand for it." The atmosphere shifted. Something was about to happen, something no one expected. A tense silence settled over the gate as the confrontation between Sergeant Daniel Hayes and the airline staff continued. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "This is ridiculous," a middle-aged man in a business suit muttered. An elderly woman, clutching her boarding pass, stepped forward. "That man has served this country. If he wants his soldier to escort him, who are you to deny him?" The flight attendant, clearly flustered, held her ground. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but these are company policies. Our staff is trained for situations like this." Daniel inhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. Policies shouldn't strip a war hero of his dignity. A younger man, wearing a hoodie and earbuds, pulled one out and spoke loudly. "So, let me get this straight. A guy who risked his life for our freedom can't even choose who helps him get on a plane?" The crowd rumbled with agreement. More passengers chimed in, "She's making this personal. They just want to exert control. Shame on this airline." The flight attendant's expression wavered as she glanced at her colleagues. She hadn't expected this level of pushback. Colonel Parker, who had been silent, finally spoke. His voice was calm but commanding. "I've been through worse than this. I've faced enemies on the battlefield. But I never thought I'd have to fight for something as simple as getting on a plane with dignity." The crowd murmured in outrage. Then, a woman near the front raised her phone. "If they don't let him through, we'll make sure the whole world sees this." A chain reaction began. Phones went up all around, cameras recording. The airline staff's faces turned pale. For the first time, they realized they were losing control. The murmurs grew into loud protests as more passengers pulled out their phones, recording the standoff between Sergeant Hayes, Colonel Parker, and the airline staff. The flight attendant, now visibly nervous, glanced around, realizing she was outnumbered. "This is company policy," she repeated, but her voice lacked the confidence it had before. A tall man in a leather jacket stepped forward. "I fly all the time. I've seen people escort family members without a problem. This isn't policy, it's discrimination." Another passenger, a woman in her 50s, shook her head. "You can't treat a disabled veteran like this. We won't let it happen." The airline supervisor, a stern-looking man in a navy suit, finally approached. He glanced at the growing crowd, then turned to the flight attendant. "What's the issue here?" Sergeant Hayes stepped forward. "Sir, this man is a war veteran, and he's requesting that I escort him to his seat. Your staff is refusing, citing some so-called policy." The supervisor studied Colonel Parker for a moment, then exhaled. "I understand, but we have procedures." "Forget your procedures," someone in the crowd interrupted. This is about basic respect. A younger woman, still recording, added, this is already going viral. You better do the right thing before it's too late. The supervisor's face paled as he glanced at the passengers. Nearly half the terminal was watching. Some were live-streaming, and others were angrily whispering among themselves. Let him through, a voice finally called out. It was the airline pilot. The room fell silent. The pilot, a man in his early 50s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, and his voice was firm. I won't take off until this man is escorted properly. The airline staff froze, passengers cheered. Now, the airline had no choice. The airline supervisor hesitated, his eyes darting between the pilot, the irate passengers, and the recording phones. He knew the situation was slipping out of control. A bad decision here could mean public outrage, lawsuits, and even job losses. The flight attendant, still standing stubbornly in front of Sergeant Hayes and Colonel Parker, crossed her arms. Sir, we can't just break protocol because people are yelling. The pilot took a step forward, his expression unwavering. That's not protocol. That's poor judgment. If this man needs assistance, he gets assistance. Period. Sergeant Hayes kept his tone calm but firm. Colonel Parker has served this country for decades. He's earned more respect than this airline is giving him. The passengers erupted in agreement. A man in a business suit added, what's wrong with you people? If a celebrity showed up, you'd roll out the red carpet. But a veteran? You treat him like this? The pressure was mounting. The supervisor turned to the flight attendant. We're making an exception. Step aside. Her lips tightened, but she obeyed. Sergeant Hayes finally placed his hand under Colonel Parker's arm. Let's get you to your seat, sir. Colonel Parker nodded, his voice low with emotion. Thank you, son. As they walked toward the gate, the entire terminal erupted in applause. The airline staff looked humiliated, but the passengers had won. The pilot turned back to the supervisor. Now, let's get this plane in the air before your airline gets more bad press than it can handle. The battle was over, but the lesson would be remembered. As Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes finally boarded the plane, the tension in the terminal lingered. The airline staff, visibly shaken, avoided eye contact with the angry passengers still discussing what had just unfolded. Sergeant Hayes helped the elderly veteran into his seat, ensuring he was comfortable before taking his own beside him. Are you all right, sir? He asked quietly. Colonel Parker gave a small nod, though his hands still trembled slightly. I fought in wars, son, but I never thought I'd have to fight just to take a flight home. Sergeant Hayes clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling under his calm exterior. They should be ashamed of how they treated you. It's not right. Around them, other passengers murmured in agreement. Some even leaned over to offer words of support. A young woman across the aisle spoke up. I called the airline's headquarters. I reported everything. This isn't over. Sergeant Hayes raised an eyebrow. You actually got through? She nodded. They said they're investigating. I made sure to mention the names of those involved. Colonel Parker sighed. It's good to see people still stand up for what's right. Just as they were settling in, a voice crackled over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. We want to take a moment to recognize two honored veterans aboard our flight today, Sergeant Hayes and Colonel Parker. On behalf of the crew, we thank you for your service. A wave of applause erupted inside the plane. Sergeant Hayes looked over at the elderly veteran, a small smile breaking through his frustration. At least someone gets it. Colonel Parker chuckled softly. That's all we ever asked for, son. Just a little respect. But as the flight prepared for takeoff, one thing was clear, this fight wasn't over yet. As the plane soared through the sky, Sergeant Hayes scrolled through his phone, trying to shake off the frustration from earlier. That's when he noticed something. His notifications were blowing up. A video had been uploaded. He tapped on it and immediately recognized the scene. It was footage of the confrontation at the boarding gate. Someone had recorded everything. The video captured the moment the airline staff denied them entry, the passengers rallying behind them, and the sheer humiliation Colonel Parker endured. Airline staff disrespects disabled veteran, passengers refuse to stay silent. "Sir, you need to see this," Sergeant Hayes said, turning his phone toward Colonel Parker. The elderly veteran squinted at the screen. "What am I looking at?" Hayes let the video play. "It's all over the internet. People are furious." Around them, passengers were watching the same video, whispering to each other. Some even shared updates. "It's on Twitter now, thousands of comments already. My cousin just sent me the news link. Reporters are picking it up. I hope that rude airline worker gets what's coming to them." Sergeant Hayes checked the comments. His eyes widened. Celebrities, politicians, and veterans from all over the country were speaking up. A well-known veteran advocate tweeted, "Unacceptable. No veteran should ever be treated this way. At Airline name, you have a lot to answer for." Another comment read, "This is disgusting. Who's the airline? I'm canceling my flights with them." Colonel Parker shook his head in disbelief. "I never wanted all this attention." Sergeant Hayes patted his shoulder. "Maybe not, sir. But maybe it's time people see what really happens to veterans like you." As the flight continued, one thing became clear: the world was watching, and the airline was about to face serious consequences. By the time the plane landed, the video had amassed millions of views. News outlets were already covering the story, and hashtags like #RespectOurVeterans and #BoycottTheAirline were trending. Sergeant Hayes and Colonel Parker had barely stepped off the plane when a swarm of reporters approached them. Microphones and cameras were shoved in their faces as journalists fired off questions. "Sergeant Hayes, how do you feel about the airline's treatment of Colonel Parker?" "Colonel, do you believe this was discrimination? Do you plan to take legal action?" Before they could respond, an airline representative rushed forward. A stiff-looking man in a suit, flanked by two assistants. His nervous smile barely concealed his discomfort. "Colonel Parker, Sergeant Hayes, I'm deeply sorry for what happened earlier," he began. "The airline does not condone such behavior, and we are conducting an internal investigation." Sergeant Hayes crossed his arms. "An investigation?" The whole world saw what happened. The representative cleared his throat. "Yes, and we, understand the public's outrage. The employee involved has been placed on leave pending review." Colonel Parker gave him a tired look. "So, you're only acting because you got caught?" The crowd murmured in agreement. The airline rep forced another smile. "As a token of our regret, we'd like to offer you first-class tickets for life." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some people clapped, while others muttered that the airline was just trying to save face. Colonel Parker, however, wasn't impressed. He adjusted his hat and said firmly, "I don't need first-class tickets. I need respect. Not just for me, but for every veteran who serves this country." The crowd erupted in applause. The representative turned pale, realizing their attempt at damage control had backfired, but this was just the beginning. The real consequences were yet to come. As Colonel Parker's words spread across social media, outrage against the airline intensified. News channels debated the incident, with veterans, activists, and even politicians weighing in. Talk shows invited military members to share their own horror stories about mistreatment while traveling. The backlash was swift and merciless. People started canceling flights, demanding refunds, and boycotting the airline. The CEO of the airline was forced to address the situation. A press conference was hastily arranged. The CEO, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing in his face. He cleared his throat and spoke in a calculated, rehearsed tone. "We at Global Skies Airlines deeply regret the events that transpired. We value our veterans and their sacrifices, and we are taking immediate action." But the reporters weren't satisfied. One journalist shot up her hand. "Isn't it true that this isn't the first time Global Skies has faced discrimination accusations?" The CEO's face twitched. "We are always working to improve." Another reporter cut him off. "Will the employees involved be fired?" What's your response to the growing boycott? The CEO forced a smile. We understand the frustration and are committed to change. But the damage was already done. Meanwhile, on social media, a new petition was circulating demanding a full public apology to Colonel Parker and all veterans. Within hours, it gained over 1 million signatures. That night, news anchors revealed even bigger consequences for the airline. Their stock had plummeted, and major investors were pulling out. The company was in crisis, but for Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes, this wasn't about corporate losses. This was about justice, and the fight wasn't over yet. The pressure mounted. Global Skies Airlines realized they had no choice but to take action. Their reputation was in free fall, and the outrage was only growing. Behind closed doors, the executives argued over damage control. Some suggested firing the staff involved, while others wanted to release a second apology video. But nothing seemed enough. Meanwhile, Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes remained in the spotlight. Veteran organizations, lawmakers, and even celebrities voiced their support, demanding meaningful change. Then, an unexpected announcement shook everyone. The airline offered to meet with Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes. They claimed they wanted to make things right. At first, Colonel Parker was skeptical. They're only doing this because they're losing money, he muttered to Hayes, but Hayes saw an opportunity. Let's hear them out. If nothing else, we can make them answer for what they did. The meeting was set in a high-rise corporate office. When Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes arrived, they were greeted by a room full of stiff-faced executives. The CEO himself extended a hand. Colonel Parker, Sergeant Hayes, thank you for coming. Neither man shook his hand. The CEO sighed. Look, we know we messed up. We want to make amends. We're prepared to offer a public apology, a full refund, and first-class tickets for any future flights. Colonel Parker raised an eyebrow. That's it? The CEO hesitated. And we'll also be rolling out new sensitivity training for employees to prevent future incidents. Sergeant Hayes leaned forward. That's a start, but it's not enough. The executives looked uneasy. They weren't expecting a counteroffer. What do you want? The CEO asked hesitantly. Colonel Parker folded his arms. If you really want to make this right, here's what you'll do. The room went silent, waiting for his demand. Colonel Parker locked eyes with the CEO. If you truly want to make things right, you'll do more than just refund a ticket and say you're sorry. The room tensed. The executives exchanged nervous glances. What do you have in mind? The CEO asked cautiously. Sergeant Hayes sat up straighter. First, you're going to issue a public apology, not just to us, but to every veteran you've ever disrespected. The CEO nodded slowly. We can do that. Second, Parker continued, your so-called sensitivity training? That's not enough. You need a real veterans program. I want to see hiring initiatives for veterans, priority boarding for active military, and a public commitment to treating service members with respect. The executives stiffened. This wasn't just a PR fix, it was a fundamental change. The CEO sighed, rubbing his temples. That's a lot. Parker didn't flinch. That's the price of redemption. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, the CEO looked around at his team. Can we make this happen? One by one, the executives hesitantly nodded. Fine, the CEO said at last. We'll do it. But we'll need time. Sergeant Hayes folded his arms. We'll be watching. A week later, the airline made a nationwide announcement. They issued a heartfelt apology, unveiled a new veterans policy, and pledged to support military service members. The internet erupted again, but this time, with praise. Veterans groups thanked Parker and Hayes for forcing real change. Passengers shared stories of airlines mistreating them, hoping this would set a new standard, and at the next airport Colonel Parker and Sergeant Hayes visited, something incredible happened. As they stepped toward their gate, an airline employee greeted them with a respectful salute. Welcome aboard, gentlemen. Thank you for your service. The battle had been won. Not just for them, but for every veteran who came after. If this story moved you, share it to spread awareness. No veteran should ever be treated with disrespect. Would you stand up in this situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can make a difference.